G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Now it's a Friday like midday morning where I am, but no, regardless of where we are in the world, we're all leading into a weekend. So I hope that you have a fantastic weekend and you take some time for yourself and your family. And to all my Yanks out there, happy 4th of July as well for yesterday or today, depending on when you see this. It's hard to get an idea of the time zones when you travel a lot, but as always today, we have a lot to go. We need to look at some gas import and export in Ukraine. We need to look at what Putin has said about Trump. We need to look at an interview of Zelensky, as well as what's been happening with then Tucker Carlson. We'll look at some strikes, some important strikes, and some geolocations of that. And of course, look at the maps and some problems that may have occurred and why we have seen some areas fall fairly rapidly. Now, the first spot I want to look is I actually want to look in Kherson. So, of course, here is Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22 and the purple since 2014. Now, we see Kherson is split by the Dnieper River, the right bank and the left bank. The way you have right and left bank is the flow of the water. If you're looking in the flow on the left bank, and of course, this flows north to south. Now, I've been getting told a lot just to keep an eye on this area because something is going to happen, but no more or less specific than this. Now we get on the fires map that there's a hell of a lot of fires occurring on the left bank, so the Russian occupied area then of Kherson. Now, one thing we do know is the Novgokovka Dam, which sits just here, that was blown up and of course caused this area to flood down here, therefore putting a lot more water downstream than usual. That said, a lot of that has now dried out, and I would say that there's a lot more growth and these fires will have far more intensity due to then that growth. And what we see by these fires is that a lot of Russian units and their positions are then burning from strikes, ammo dumps, all of this, and they're being choked out by then just the smoke, bushfires, wildfires, whatever you call it, wherever area in the world. I'm from southwest Victoria, which is one of the most fire-prone areas in the entire globe, and full understanding of how dangerous these are and the just effect the smoke alone can have. So the Russians are fleeing positions down in there. Now, I'm not saying that this was done on purpose for this, but it doesn't matter. Cause and effect, that if you've had a heap of water flow through here, it's dried out, a heap more growth, then massive fires, this may then have the Russians move out of some of these areas. That said, fires are only for a few days, a few weeks before then that area is then burnt out. But something just to look at, and natural things like this or however it was caused, that has a huge then effect both strategically and tactically on then the battlefield. Now, let's have a look at some things from Zelensky. So you and me and probably a lot of others saw Tucker then tweet this. Looks like we've got the Zelensky interview. We've been trying for 2 years, and with particular intensity after interviewing Putin in February. The point is to bring Americans much needed information about the conflict that's completely reshaping their country's position in the world. Coming soon, we hope. Now, there's a few things in this. Of course, Tucker Carlson had that incredibly famous interview with Putin, but he also had, vehemently said that we reached out to Zelensky. I want to talk to Zelensky and hadn't heard back. But here he's saying it looks like we have got it. Now, talking about reshaping the country's position in the world. Now, this is happening, whether right or wrong, depending how you see it. But people are saying these axis of evil autocratic states are coming closer together. So, of course, you've seen Russia, Iran, North Korea, and other states, become closer. But then you've also seen economic alliances caused by other factors as well of then BRICS. And then you've also seen asymmetrical elements, such as Russia's influence into Africa, as China's influence into Africa and Asia overall. So we are in, a state of flux where the world and America's position in the world, going from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, is changing. And what is happening here in Israel is just as much, if not more, of that happening too. And we will link how that may come together a little bit as well. But Zelensky's press secretary then said this: Mr. Tucker Carlson should more carefully check his sources in the FSB, of course, Russia's security services like the FBI. The president of Ukraine has a completely different schedule, and Tucker Carlson is not there. So Zelensky's office saying that this is not happening. And also, this is from an official. This is Ukrainian official saying of Tucker's sources in the FSB. Now, I know it's sarcastic, but I think throwing claims like this still needs to be careful. If from me is one thing, from an official is another. Now, this from a Ukrainian, he said Tucker Carlson sure is, whatever, but he is a Republican and has a multi-million-dollar audience. So he has a huge audience. Maybe it's still better to make a deal with him somewhere to try and influence the thoughts of Trump's electorate, who we have to work with for the next 4 years. Now, this guy's making some good points. Regardless of what you think of Tucker, I think it is still in Ukraine's best interest to interview with Tucker. If Zelensky doesn't interview with Tucker, well, Tucker will go, why not? If you, what then are you hiding? And that will have an influence there. Tucker is one of the most influential voices in America, maybe only second to Rogan, and has a huge audience. Like this guy points out, why would you not do anything? If you believe that Tucker is just stupid and a source and this and that, will go on and just deny and rebut everything he says, make him look like an idiot and win, then that will go to a huge, massive audience. And like he puts out, of course, Tucker is incredibly famous and well-renowned in that conservative party. And that conservative party is looking like then it will, conservative audience, sorry, it's looking like the conservative party in the US will then win. Now, Zelensky has had an interview with Bloomberg and has said some interesting bits and pieces as well. Now, you can go and watch the full interview here, but some Ukrainian pages have just pulled out some little bits that they are then speaking about. So he has said, Ukraine, there are 14 brigades that are not fully equipped and lack weapons. According to Zelensky, he added, although provision of these weapons has already been approved, the supply is proceedingly slow. This is something we see Ukraine asking and saying a lot, is the weapon supply. It doesn't matter if it's approved, actually getting them there is incredibly slow. They've got 14 brigades that are not equipped, but they have then the soldiers. We do know, though, there is still this problem between the ability to conscript, mobilise, get volunteers, have them trained, and then actually arm them as well. With basic soldiers, I can't see how there's any problem getting these guys armed into the hundreds of thousands and or millions. With the amount of supply that has gone to Ukraine, every single guy should be in absolute top level gear. You've seen before, I've broken down the cost of basic soldiers equipment, but really good stuff, and how little that is in comparison to other systems that we have seen. Now, this one as well, shared by a NATO account, we can all force Russia to end the war this year. Of course, stating that you can force and hard sanctions and this and that to force to end the war, as well as by supplying Ukraine. But I don't think in any realm that this war, that the West can force Russia to end the war this year, other than if there was some military intervention, like NATO is going in. That is the only way I could see this war then ending on Russia this year. The sanctions, they've been, maybe a speed hump, but it does look like Russia's coming off the other side of that speed hump in many regards. We'll look at oil in a second, but that it's not a dead end that Ukraine will not lose. They're in a better position from the point of view of manpower than a few months ago. A new counteroffensive is a matter of arming the brigades. Then they're speaking to then those 14 then brigades that aren't armed yet but are ready to go. The US and China put aside their differences, could act together in this war. China, of course, has a hell of a lot to benefit specifically from this war. Now, let's have a look at some strikes. Now, the first one I want to talk about is in Tbol. So this is actually the point of view of this video. This is in Russia, in Tbol. So have a look here. And what we can see is then a Ukrainian drone here coming from left to right of your screen. Now, we can't actually see what it is hit here. It goes down behind this hill where we see then these smokestacks. We see then an explosion come up, but nothing more than this. Now, people are saying that this is a gunpowder factory. What I will say is if it hit and destroyed a gunpowder factory, this explosion would be immensely larger than this. Now, I'm not saying it didn't hit that, but if it ignited that magazine of that powder, it would be much larger too. But again, we're seeing Ukrainian drones operating a hell of a long way and behind the line. Now, a HIMARS has struck a crew of a Russian Supercam drone too. So you can see is this drone in the air, the one guiding in the HIMARS is overhead. Here we can see then the assembling, putting together, then the drone, the car, then driving around, and then eventually a strike on this. I can't show this on YouTube, but it will be on the Telegram if you'd like to then see it. Now, in Poltava, which is in Ukraine, just here to get an idea, here's Kyiv, here's Kharkiv, then we have seen that a Russian drone has been overhead as a Kh-59 cruise missile has struck then an oil storage facility. So we're just looking up here. I hate these massive, massive watermarks, but we can see oil storage facility here, and then you can see that there are multiple tanks here then destroyed and burning, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe then 6 on there. So we can see successful strike against oil there as well. Now in the Kharkiv region, we then see these fabs being dropped. Now, I'm not going to show every bit of fab, but the interesting one with this is you can see how these have improved their accuracy. Now, I believe these are probably 250s or 500s, but you can see how accurate and deadly these are. Now, what you can see is these drop down this tree line in then a linear fashion. So the first, second, third down here, then through a tree line. Now, what we know of, a lot of areas on the front line, let's just go down into somewhere, are, really tree line to tree line, and these fabs are causing a huge issue. A lot of bang, very cost effective, and this tree line down here, unless you're in really heavily fortified positions, that is an incredibly deadly strike on there. The guys I talk to, not only are the fabs having an effect, but psychologically they're having a huge effect as well. So let's talk a little bit about oil and gas and some other areas in the globe that may be supplying areas, and how we spoke about this world order shifting, and this will link into this. So this has come out as well overnight. Vladimir Zelensky said that Ukraine is discussing the transit of Azerbaijan gas to the European Union. The government is currently discussing an agreement to replace Russian gas with Azerbaijani gas. Now, one thing I will say, and this is one of the weird things of this war, is there are pipelines that flow from Russia through Ukraine into Europe, flowing that gas, and that has never been disrupted through this war by either side. We do not want to extend the gas contract with the Russian Federation. We don't want them to make money here. In turn, Azerbaijan has said that it wants to increase gas exports to Europe, but has not yet signed enough long-term agreements to invest in further gas production. Until Azerbaijan is able to increase its capacity, it can exchange cargo with Russia. European countries continue to import fuel through the pipeline that crosses Ukraine. In May, gas imports to Europe from Russia exceeded supplies from the US for the first time in almost 2 years, despite the region's efforts to abandon Russian fossil fuels. In June 24, Russian Gazprom increased its average daily natural gas supplies to Europe by almost 23% compared to last year. The world is very hungry for gas, for oil, for these supplies. Now let's have a look. Of course, Azerbaijan sits down in here. It borders both Russia and Iran, and of course in the Caspian Sea. So wanting to ship that across rather than in from Russia. And this is that change that we have seen. But speaking of Azerbaijan, to relate to where I am now, that Israel becomes Azerbaijan's leading oil customer with 300 million imported just in January. So its own geopolitical conflict with Armenia. We know Russia has a lot to do there. Ties with Israel continue to improve despite international pressure on both countries. So as you can see, that conflicts, this reshapes and changes how things are around the world. And we know there are many different pipelines flowing from areas in India through to Turkmenistan, from Azerbaijan, from areas, Saudi, all these massive gas and oil giants that sit around here. Of course, Russia's growing influence into Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan as well. So the next few years is going to be really, really interesting to see how sort of the world order is sitting. We know that former President Donald Trump is currently in the polls the favourite to win then the next US election. Let's have a look at what Putin has said then about Trump.
The fact that Mr. Trump, as a presidential candidate, says that he's ready and wants to stop the war in Ukraine, we take that very seriously. Well, I haven't seen his ideas on how exactly he's going to do that, and that is the key question. But I have no doubt that he says that sincerely and with support.
They're saying that he hasn't yet seen whatever proposal Trump would have to end the war, but that they would consider it then seriously. Now, some people will say, well, this is Putin because he knows he is losing, or I would say no, it's because Putin knows if this can stall here, if they can then re-sign a negotiation peace deal here based on the Istanbul Agreement, something like this, and Russia keep these areas, that he can sell this absolutely as a victory and it won't have them the massive cost, and part of that will be Ukraine's further neutrality. Now, there's a lot of talk about NATO and Ukraine and corruption and all of this. As I've said every time, and there are people saying that Ukraine is going to get into NATO before then the presidential election. Ukraine's NATO membership is not only the end of the war as one of the main elements, there are a lot of other elements Ukraine's going to have to reach before then. NATO membership for Ukraine is years away at a minimum. It's not then months. There may be agreements, there may be deals, but NATO, full NATO membership, it's still a long way off. So it will be interesting to see if Trump gets in, what is then sort of between Putin and the US and Kyiv, because Ukraine does not want to give up any territories at all. But, you know, the advisors to Trump have said that if Ukraine doesn't want to do this, then military arms will be then limited, and that would have, of course, a Russian advancement. But if Russia doesn't then want to come to the table, that then more military arms may come in to Ukraine as well from the US. One thing I will say is the presidents are a speaking head for the party, for the rest of government. And the government is incredibly powerful. The military-industrial complex is incredibly powerful and making billions, tens of billions of dollars specifically off this. So ending that sort of golden goose, well, we're not 100% sure how that will then look. Now, I've had you stick around this long, and I've got some bad news. The maps just are not updating. But let's have a look at some areas and some changes we may see. Now, what I want to talk is we'll come down then into New York. Of course, we see this Russian push up here and then out in Shumi, confirmed by then all of these maps. Now, Deep State has then released this today along with a screenshot basically of their own map. The situation with the 206 OBTRO, which described on the network, is unfortunately true. We received a lot of messages from the fighters, which contained a critical and disappointing state of affairs in the Donetsk area, in particular the settlements of New York and Yurivka. The military political leadership should pay attention to the management process of the 41st OMBR seconded units. This includes the 206th, which has become a reason for public discussions in the last few days. One possible outcome is the loss of New York and Donetsk, which will become an additional burden on the defence forces, leading to irreversible consequences. If the relevant events are not taken into account in order to take measures, then the command of the 41st will wipe out the seconded units, and the situation will only worsen. And in order to avoid unnecessary speculations, let us note that it is the incredible efforts of the soldiers that hold back the onslaught of the enemy, but people are not eternal, and no one is capable of returning life. It's also worth noting that tragic processes are also taking place in these areas. So there are further problems, command issues, supply issues on other areas. Of course, we've seen then Deep State talk about this a little bit. It is a bit awkward because Deep State, of course, have a lot of deals with Ukraine and MOD, calling out problems that are directly then happening. Now, I've got some other maps here that I usually don't use, but this is one. This is a Russian sources map here. Now, what this is showing is more of a push right up into then these first blocks, outside of even the grey zone here, but we'll wait and see if other maps then update. We have then a Noel reports map here saying a possible Russian advancement here. Now, I know for a fact, because of these maps, this is Deep State, that this is not possible, that this has actually then occurred. And then we have one more update from Noel reports, just to update just to the south of here around the Oshavatny front as well. Let's have a look at what he says. Of course, typically he's very conservative toward any Russian gain here, and you can just see the difference in some of these maps. So this is Ukrainian MOD map. This is then the Noel reports. Have a look at then Sokil down in here. So he's saying that the border runs just where this road is in Sokil, and then up just into Novosibirsk. So you can see that this shows significantly different to then the other maps. This is why we use multiple ones and compare what is then going on. Let me do one last refresh and see. No, not going to update for us today, but legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. If you'd like to support me, there's links down below. But look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.